In this lecture, I want to look a little more closely at the introductory paragraph and thesis statement for the Rogerian argument. So we're going to look at this PowerPoint. And some of these slides I will cover in a little more detail than others. Again, this PowerPoint will be provided with just the slides only, with no narration, so that you can go back and look at individual slides if you need to. So one thing with the Rogerian argument that we need to remember is that we are suspending judgment until listening to the opponent's side of the issue. And we're going to make a well-rounded conclusion, seeking a compromise and common ground, taking into account the opponent's or the alternate perspective. And the Rogerian argument acknowledges that the topic, the subject, the argumented point can be looked at from different standpoints. Remember to make a fair and balanced assessment of the opposition, detailing their viewpoints and finding merit in the opposition's views. So let's think about the thesis statement for the Rogerian argument. It's a little bit different than what we wrote in our first paper. Let's look at this statement. A Rogerian thesis differs from a regular thesis in that it is presented only after the writer has conceded that opposite viewpoints exist and that they have some merit. Okay, what this does, it shows how you have taken the opposition into account, but you still have your own perspective. And then note that a section of support for your thesis illustrates why it is valid, and a conclusion that illustrates why your position is beneficial to those on both sides of the argument. Okay, something to keep in mind when you're writing. We often think about tone and voice when we're speaking orally. You listening to this can hear my tone, my voice. Perhaps you can tell when I'm smiling, or perhaps you can tell when I'm not, based on my tone and voice. Tone is often referred to as attitude and voice as personality. But when we think about this in writing, we can combine these two into a writing style. And for academic writing for this paper, you want to be unbiased, scholarly, and the information you present needs to be supported by evidence. This is where you're going to use sources to provide information about the topic. Provide sources to provide information about the opposition's viewpoint. Provide sources to support information about your side of the topic. And then find sources that support the common ground, the compromise that you find. Tone is the writer's voice in the written word. Tone can express attitude, bias, personality. Remember, in this Rogerian paper, we're going to try to avoid bias. We're going to try to present balanced perspectives of both sides of the issue. In formal writing, in academic writing, which is what you're doing for this paper, your tone should be clear, concise, confident, and yet courteous. We're going to withhold judgment of the opposition when we're writing our paper. It's important that the Rogerian thesis is delivered in a neutral, non-adversarial language. Okay, remember, your thesis is not going to be an attack on the opposition. It's going to present your viewpoint without dismissing or demeaning the viewpoints of others. Let's look at this example. In a thesis that advocated the death penalty, you would not want to refer to those on the other side of the issue as bleeding heart liberals. Okay, that's a very negative, harsh tone, very judgmental. So we would not want to use words such as that in our paper. Your arguments need to be presented in a non-combative manner. Some things that you should avoid: using the word always, words always and never. Those are broad generalizations. We want to avoid oversweeping adjectives: outstanding, obvious. Likewise, avoid using adverbs such as really, clearly. And then some other types of language. We want to be very careful not to use inflammatory language where it appears that we are attacking the other person. Want to try to avoid negative words. Beware of the perceptions that can be conveyed by negative words, and I've provided you a list of some negative words that you might want to avoid in your writing. Let's look at some examples of how we can change negative words. Instead of saying the problem we have at hand is, maybe we say the situation we have at hand is. Problem automatically indicates negative, but a situation, that kind of de-escalates everything. It's just a situation. It's not a problem, it's a situation. Okay, let's look at this next example. We must implement. Okay, must, that's demanding. What if we said we should prefer to implement? If you'll read those out loud to yourself, you'll see the difference in the tone and attitude that it changes for the paper. In your paper, think about describing what can be done instead of what cannot be done. Nothing can be gained by telling people what they can or cannot do or what cannot be done. So keep that in mind, especially when you're reaching your compromise for common ground. Instead of using words such as limitations or constraints, consider using words like possibilities and opportunities. Instead of saying the fault or the error in your point of view, maybe say the differences of opinion that we share. That can help change the tone and attitude of your paper. So let's look at this introductory paragraph. Notice here the color coding that I have. You're going to have a hook, which is the opening sentence or two. Then you're going to introduce the topic that you're arguing, the problem, and some background information, and then your thesis statement. Remember, the hook is the sentence or two that draws the reader in and makes them interested in reading the rest of your essay. It can be a quote, surprising fact, rhetorical question, or any other attention grabber. Now remember, if you use quotes or facts, something that's not original, you must cite that source with an in-text citation. Okay, then the problem and background. The problem is the issue that the two sides disagree over. Provide some background information about that problem. And then the thesis statement will let the reader know about compromise, where you stand, and what compromise you're looking for. So what I want to do next is I've provided a couple of examples of introductory paragraphs. I've color-coded them, putting the hook in yellow, the problem and background in green, and the thesis statement in the teal blue color. So let's look at this. This is from my paper example that I've already provided to you, my hook. She noted that while homeschooling has become a fashionable choice for young urban professionals who want the best education for their children, including many in the Pacific Northwest, The subject is still fraught with controversies about cognitive and social development, governmental involvement, standards, and safety. Okay, so that's my hook, talking about a fashionable choice and young urban professionals. That's my attention getter. Then this area in green is some background information about the topic, opponents of homeschooling, proponents of homeschooling, some of their different thoughts and ideas. And then my thesis statement, ensuring safety and educational support for all homeschooling students should be a top priority as the state works to ensure parents who want to still have an opportunity to homeschool their children can do so. So in this, I'm saying that my common ground, my compromise is ensuring safety and educational support for homeschool students. And then I'll address how to do that. Okay, let's look at this other example. Again, remember, yellow is the hook, green is the background information, and the teal blue is the thesis. In Dwight Okita's, in response to Executive Order 9066, the narrator, a young Japanese American, writes a letter to the government who has ordered her family into a relocation camp after Pearl Harbor. Okay, so this hook is referring to a story or letter, and it's an emotional appeal about someone in a relocation camp after Pearl Harbor. Then the green is the background information, talking about Japanese descent. Tells the government that she asked this friend to plant tomato seeds in her honor, talking about World War II and the issue of race relations. Then in the teal blue color, recently, with the outbreaks of terrorism in the United States, Spain, and England, many are calling for racial profiling to stifle terrorism. The issue has sparked debate, with one side calling it racism and the other calling it common sense. So in this thesis statement, I know that we have two sides talking about terrorism and racial profiling, and that they're going to seek a common ground on that. And then I'm giving you an example of how they would conclude their paper at the very end based on this particular topic. Then I've provided you with another example that I'll let you read. Again, the hook is in yellow, the background information in green, and the thesis statement in the teal blue. So the takeaway from this that I want to emphasize is that your introductory paragraph, the thesis statement, illustrates what the issue is and where the compromise is going to be reached. Remember that introductory paragraph, you must present some background information on the topic and why there's some disagreement on it. Okay. I've provided you another video in this module about the introductory paragraph and thesis statement. And again, these slides will be available for you without narration to review. So remember, suspend judgment and remember your tone and voice when writing the Rogerian argument.